back there. So, I was a history teacher. I gave a lesson that looked like this more times than I cared to admit. And it is a classic, just in case lesson. We're running through the American history textbook because we have to get from Plymouth Rock to yesterday. We only have 180 days, even though we still had 180 days to teach American history when we were teaching it in 1920, when there was a third less of it to teach. If you want to teach the content, but you also want those critical thinking, problem solving, productivity, communication skills, critical thinking skills too, you do the lesson on the right. You take kids, you put them into groups, you give them a research assignment, you ask them to think, to work together, to decide for themselves based on the 4 different points of view, what do they think happened? This is historical thinking, not historical memorization. But if you go back to this slide, that requires a different way to measure the outcome. It requires a different way to teach. And because these are also critical, this lesson takes 5 times the amount of time that one does. Easy. So that traditional march through time doesn't work if you want to use the content in a way that helps kids make meaning of what they're doing and build the skills they need. Not just to explore the Boston Massacre, but if I took that word off and put Ferguson, Missouri, the same lesson template works. Kids will have to think historically about that event. Another critical barrier and tension is the way we talk about accountability for learning. We have been bought and sold the idea that reliable measurement is the gold standard. So, give me a reliable test. So, for us in public education today, it is more important to measure meaningless things reliably than it is to give kids generally helpful and appropriate feedback on things that really matter. That's a problem. Because how well you defended the argument is a squishier thing than how many state capitals do you know. I can reliably measure everyone's knowledge in this room of the 50 state capitals in about 5 minutes. It would take me about 5 hours, but I could also pretty reliably measure your ability to defend Connecticut's choice of Hartford as a good choice or a bad choice as a state capital. If I was looking to hire someone for my organization, I want someone who excelled on the second test, not the first one.
What about both?
Well, clearly, you have to have both. You can't argue and defend the soldiers at the Boston Massacre as John Adams did unless you know the facts of the case. The trick is you can't just learn the facts of the case. You have to learn the facts of the case and apply them. And that takes more time than just learning all of the facts of all the cases. So it has to be both. But in order for it to be both, you have to make room for both in the curriculum. On the enrollment thing, this is something that is not new to any of you, but the tension is between regional decision-making and resource sharing and local control and the burden of cost. And as you know, I've been all through the Northwest corner And it's astonishing, communities that agree on 95% of everything, 98% of everything, will stop short of sharing resources because of the remaining 2%. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's just a matter of how long you can put up with it. So this is the national enrollment data. And what you can see is that every state that is well-educated and cold is losing students. And every state that's warm is gaining students. Regionally, Connecticut, that's 2013 to 2018. And that's a trend. That's statewide. Locally, it's the exact same story. Everywhere in the northwest corner. I said this when we met 5 years ago. I served 31 school districts. There are 2 that have held or increased enrollment and 29 where it's gone down. And the average drop over the last decade is 25%. Those are what we projected at Battelle when we did the regional study in 2013. And we were off by the original amount, but we were right on in terms of the actual decline. And layered on to the regional decision making is the tension between wanting to serve individual needs and the community need. And if you look at this cost data, this is per pupil spending in the 18-19 school year. Danbury is one of my districts. It's got the lowest per pupil in the state. That and New Britain, I think, are very close. That's $12,828. This is year-old data, so 18-19. Colebrook was 19, Norfolk was 22, Cornwall is 35. And what you see in Cornwall is your future. Because you get to a point where you can't have any fewer people and still have a school. It doesn't matter. So if you did multi-grade, okay, K1, 1, 2, if you had that, you did it all, you get to a point where if you want to bring kids together and put them in a building, you have to have a principal, you have to have a custodian, you have to have a nurse, you have to have teachers. That's what you end up with. You have 50 kids. Cornwall graduated 2 kids in 8th grade last year. That's your per pupil.
Are there lower grade numbers going up, or are they still?
No,
Is anything happening there?
Birth rates are not
Yeah.
on the increase.
And it's the same virtually throughout.
That's the brand.
And it's just the challenge.
Cornwall is accepting out of town students for $2,000.
Yeah. And how many they get?
I have no idea, because I didn't know.
The last I heard, there was a waiting list.
Yeah.
For the presentation by the, ad agency that they hired to promote their school.
Right, that was the ad agency.
If there's a waiting list, they put a cap on it.
Yeah, that's,
Because they could take 300. But they can't afford to take 300. That's the thing. You take 300 kids at 2,000 apiece, you need to hire 5 teachers. At 100 each, plus benefit. I mean, it's just, the math, the math is challenging.
Why
And-
would anybody want to accept $2,000 to educate a child that costs 20 some odd,
Right, and that is the,
30 some odd to educate?
there's a break point.
that is the hard place in the rock that local boards are in. So we're gonna devalue it to try to bring kids in, and then the parents who are there paying the full BOCO, what are you kidding me? We're paying this much. So, I mean, it's really complicated. Plus, as you know, it's all about distance too. Okay, great. I can drive to West Cornwall for $2,000. From where? How much time are you willing to spend in a bus? We had public hearings where people were gnashing their teeth that our kids gotta drive all the way from Colebrook to the Battelle, it's 5 miles, oh my God. You know, people want, it's amazing how people want what they have and are insulated to some degree over what the cost of that becomes over time. And a lot of that is this, right? One of the big challenges that I've seen in this work is, you know, I obviously thought it was a good idea, but it was not my role as an outsider to be the voice of it. And there needs to be powerful voices that have a vision for what's possible. It can't just be a discussion about what you're gonna lose or you're never gonna do it. It has to be about what can be gained. And I was a history teacher. If you were a history teacher or understand graphs, I'm gonna give you this up front. This is not the scale. Do not give me a hard time. But one of the things that we're also seeing in addition to this memory versus vision is think about the truly disruptive changes to economy and culture, you know, some truly disruptive changes through human history. So the first agricultural revolution, we don't have to move around, we actually can stop in one place and grow stuff. Between that and we can grow enough stuff to feed others, you get about 10,000 years to get used to that. And then the mechanization of it was just a few thousand years after that. And then a digital revolution, 100 years after that. And the mobile revolution, 30 years after that. And now the AI revolution, 5 years after that. The disruptions are coming faster than we can process them as a culture. That video of the future of work and the impact that the mechanization of labor is going to have on the economy, our political class can't agree on anything. And solving this problem takes smart people from every side of the aisle working together on what the best solution is. What are you going to do when you have 50 million people who don't have a job? You think that number's crazy? There are 10 million people employed in transporting goods from one place to the other. In 10 years, every single one of them can be replaced by an automated something that'll be cheaper and safer. How many jobs are involved in serving the 10 million who drive? This truck stops, you just go right down the line. Fewer organs for transplant. Fewer accidents. What are you going to insure? I mean, who is thinking about these things? It is really going to be challenging. One piece of good news. After 20 years of increased involvement in local public education, for the first time, the State Department of Ed has actually taken a step back and given high schools and regional boards that are responsible for high school credits more flexibility in how to accumulate the 25 credits that you must get in order to graduate. And there are now options to put together multiple different pathways to look at different skill arrangements, different course arrangements. You have quite a bit of flexibility now that you didn't have at any time through No Child Left Behind or since Race to the Top in 2012. On top of that, more good news, there's no one in Washington that gives a crap about public education. There just isn't. And in Hartford, despite a legislature that cannot help itself and will continue to try to meddle in public education, the staff of the State Department of Ed has been so decimated by the shrinking of the state government. If you think state government keeps growing, you're wrong. It's actually shrunk quite a bit, especially in education. There's a third fewer employees in the State Department of Ed than there were 10 years ago. There's no one there to watch the store. I mean, there are all kinds of changes that districts could make, I think, frankly, and never be challenged or caught, because they don't have anybody to watch. Now, that means the superintendent's gotta risk their career by knowingly not doing something that they're supposed to do, which they won't do. But the point is, the hard oversight, it has loosened. There is some room for creativity and flexibility now, more so than there has been. The constraints are all the ones that we talked about before. You have fewer kids, it costs more money, and neither one of those two trends are going anywhere fast unless the status quo changes. So resources are a challenge, constrained vision is a challenge, and your geography is a challenge. I mean, that is a big barrier. You have to get kids from one place to the other. But if you see challenges, if you can see challenges as opportunities, there are opportunities. 2 years ago, I think Mary Beth got this in her email last week. 2 years ago, there was a group of superintendents that got together and started thinking about, this is crazy, we have to have all these snow days, and it's just not, why would you ask a kid to go to school on June 29th when during the winter, if you had a prolonged weather interruption, we could do a digital learning or a take-home learning day and have it count as a school day. So I worked with the CAPS Technology Committee. We put together a monograph that sort of laid out how surrounding states, legislatures have changed the law to make it possible and to give districts guidance. CAPS didn't act on it, the legislature didn't act on it, the state board didn't act on it, it didn't go anywhere. Got a call this week from the deputy commissioner.
The coronavirus.
Can you reframe that introductory page as a coronavirus interruption? So I did, and it was sent to all the superintendents. If it's May 1st and you have to shut your school down for 2 months, are you gonna fold your tent and go home? Are you gonna try to have learning keep going? So necessity sometimes really is the mother of invention, but who knows? One thing I know for sure is that the creation of light bulb did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. At some point you're going to have to think of things differently, and you can polish that stone for as long as you want. It's still that stone. And if you need a feather rather than a rock, polishing that is not going to help you. And I just urge all of you, when you enter into the discussions about what does the future of our school look like, what does the future of our community look like, think about those tensions between where you came from and where you want to go and how much you want to bring with you. Because you're not going to bring all of it with you, whether you want to or not. And find a solution that the community can support that serves the best interest of kids. And be a part of sharing a vision that's productive and focused on their needs, and balance that with where your community is. I love this quote. Is as appropriate now as it was then. Yeah. So that's what I had for sort of content.
Sherry.
Yeah.
Is the state gonna give us $4 million so we can build a fiber optic network in this town so that this digital learning on snow days could actually happen?
There are some discussions about, let's talk about a couple of the helpful things the state actually could do. That would be one of them. That would be one of them. You know, the state has and when I say the state, I'm generally talking about the legislature, okay? Because the State Department of Ed, more and more, is just simply trying to implement what the legislature comes up with. And I'll give you an off-track example, but a good one. The data on school start times for adolescents is really quite clear. You know, and if you've ever raised a teenager, you know this to be true. You know, later school start times for middle and high school students pretty much is universally regarded as a smart thing to do. It fits their biological clock better. It's not a matter of them just staying up later. Their bodies literally during puberty aren't ready to sleep that early. But it's really hard for one district in a region to do it. If the state just said, all right, that's it. No high school can start before 8:30. All right, so now we all have to live with that. But they won't do it. They won't do it. You know, I know special ed is a topic that's come up. There are 4 states in the nation that put the burden of proof in special ed on the school instead of the parent. So in 46 states, if you're the parent of a special ed student, you have to demonstrate how what you are asking for is needed to meet the need of the student over the plan the district has. In Connecticut, it's the opposite. The district has to prove that it will work. They have the burden of proof. And we are the only state that puts the losing side of a contested special ed hearing on the district. So if I challenge an IEP and lose, I not only have to provide the service as dictated by the prescription, I have to pay for all of the legal fees for both sides. So districts are in impossible positions. Special ed is one of the highest regulated, strictly enforced set of laws on the books. You are messing with kids' civil rights, and they are protected at the federal and state level. And we have the entire system stacked against the school district. You have to understand in special ed, the phrase fair does not mean equal. It's the foundation of the whole system. Would you like to have cerebral palsy? Would you like to have dyslexia? In order to get an equal educational opportunity, that student needs more attention and resources than their abled counterpart. And that's the law at the federal level and at the state level. And the system is designed to protect kids from what happened long before those laws existed, and that was they were part of that group that we just sent away. That is not going to change in Connecticut. You can't even get the legislature to have a hearing on burden of proof. We've tried, it's been tried 4 times in the last 10 years. And every time it happens, there is an intense lobbying effort that is both heartbreaking and politically brutal. Just parents line up all the way down the block with their kids who have real needs who never had them met by their local school district. And no politician wants to touch it. This will be the law in the state of Connecticut for the foreseeable future.
But there's no reason why, what I don't understand is why isn't there a pot of money that funds all special ed. I mean, that's the problem for little schools is.
Right, so
just
there are
the-
two
the
things.
win- You know,
Right.
the sort of
So-
random nature of it.
There are two things about that. One is, any attempt to change the funding stream has winners and losers. Okay? So there's a proposal in the state right now to create a statewide funding pool. So every district sends all of their special ed money to the state. And the state pays all the bills. So the idea here is you have predictability in your cost, which would help a small town, right? You have two really challenging cases move to town, all of a sudden you have $300,000 you didn't think. Two leave, you have 300,000, wow, woo, yeah, predictability is great. But predictability based on an ever increasing cost curve. So one year, you know, if we collected everyone's money, next year you might save a little. And the year after that, you might not save anything and it might cost you more. And not only that, but what is the incentive to try to control costs if you just send it into a big pool? Oh, all right, I'll do that. We'll do that. No constraint on cost. So the state just putting it all in one place won't change the overall expense of it. There is a funding mechanism in Connecticut right now called excess cost. It's based on a formula, and much like the local funding formula, they've never stood by it. So it used to be like, it used to be twice per pupil, and you would get all that excess cost back. So if you had one of those really high dollar events, you would get some of that money back from the state. But as the state's fiscal position worsened, they changed the formula and shifted more and more of the burden back to the local district. Now, you already engage in a regional special ed collaborative, right? You use the region, so you're making, that's smarter than trying to do it on your own. And as an agency, we try to provide regional solutions. And in fact, there's some hope that the state will give organizations like the RES seed money to start regional programs that will serve more local communities, much like your own regional special ed folks do it for you. But that's a way of gaining some efficiency in providing an important service.
Yeah, I wanna go back to the, what you're talking about, the lineup of parents with special ed, kids whose needs were not met. Now,
Yeah.
aside from resource constraints, just aside, does anybody ever ask why? Why did it, and I know this from having lots of friends with kids who's had needs who couldn't be met, and the pushback and the stalling and the foot dragging is terrible. And I will just talk about one thing that I just know about, because I've had to look into it with, dyslexia. Why wait? Why prove somebody's 2 grades behind? Why? Yale has the Shaywitz dyslexia screen.
Yep.
It's like $1 a kid. You can do it reliably in kindergarten and 1st grade. You could kind of solve for dyslexia really early on and save a ton of money. And why does nobody look into the why of that?
I think, I don't think it's fair to say that nobody looks into the why. Every district's different, every circumstance is different, every family is different, every child is different. The district has a burden to meet the needs of the child. Over-identification is a well-known phenomenon that has driven the needs costs up. So there was, in every, trends go by where the abuse is, right? So there were districts that over-identified kids with reading difficulties and put them in special ed programs when a reading intervention, not special ed, would have been enough. So now I think you see sort of the pendulum swinging the other way. let's try to improve our first tier instruction for all students and try to meet their needs prior to having them be identified and get into a special ed system that complicates things if we can meet kids' needs in tier 1 through normal programming. So every district tries to find their own balance point in terms of what makes sense. And it's about finite resources too. I would never second guess a superintendent who is faced with that decision, because they know their budget, they know their people, and it's just the way the system works.
I think you would have to agree though that there are some real abuses of that, like parents who cannot get what their child actually needs.
Right, and for every one of those, frankly, there are parents who don't have disabled kids, who are playing the system to get them stuff they don't deserve. All I need is extra time, right? I'm gonna get a doctor to write me, give me an evaluation. I don't like your evaluation. I don't agree that my kid doesn't need this, so I'm gonna go try to find a private psychologist, get that report. Now I'm gonna bring that to the school, and I'm gonna request a hearing and an IEP, and I'm gonna use my doctor. So I don't doubt that there are parents with kids whose real needs aren't met, and there are also parents with kids who don't have real needs who are trying to get them an advantage. So the system gets played on both sides, and there are folks that get hurt on both sides. Kids with real needs get hurt by parents who are trying to game the system, and the same is true of the district on the other hand. It's a real hard thing to balance, and it is very highly regulated, and there are incentives in the system to use the system. And it is a reaction to generations of kids that got ignored and pushed away.
Maybe just one or two more questions?
Yeah.
So if we're at 73 students at Hotel now and Colebrook is 74, 75, give or take, if one of the things that we're looking at with the declining student numbers and the increasing amount that we're spending per student, if one of the solutions that we're looking at is consolidation between those two schools, we double the population now, but in 3 years, we're looking at a 25% decrease in the population.
Sure.
So in 7, 8 years, we're back to the same per student numbers until, as you see,
Right.
global applied
Well, I mean,
warming
sure.
increases the population.
Right.
But so is the
There was a moment in a public hearing in Colebrook, as I recall, where someone said, you know what, if we just went home and got busy, we could solve this problem with the people right here in this room. Come on, go make some babies, that'll make it happen. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
that might also be the key. But if we look at consolidation between these two schools, and in 7 or 8 years we're in the same boat, is the solution more consolidation, regionalization, or is there some other ball that we need to be keeping our eye on or looking to as the
Sure.
solution?
I mean, proximity is always going to be a barrier. And I wouldn't recommend any distance solution that doesn't involve opportunities for kids to interact with other kids. You know, you have to, I think it will always be an element of public education that benefits from the positive interaction of kids under adult supervision, beyond just the social requirement for doing it. And in fact, you know, most work environments require kids to interact productively together. Adults to interact productively together. So it will always be a challenge in a geographic region that has the student density that you have now and will likely have in the future. But if you had done consolidation 5 years ago, you would have saved 5 years worth of money and would have already then had a combined combined program for that long. So basically, for every year that you don't do it, there's lost opportunity in savings and programming. I've always thought this. And you can certainly function with 20 kids in a school. You can function that way. You can do it. It's just a matter of what is lost and what is gained. So for every family that thinks having a teacher and 3 kids in a classroom is a good thing, there's a parent with a kid who's getting bullied in a classroom of 5 and it's gonna be that classroom of 5 for 8 years and can't wait to go to Cornwall, would only cost $2,000. So I mean, those are the competing tensions. And there's no question that you can have a wonderful school with 200 kids and you can have a wonderful school with 40 kids. Are you willing to pay for it? And what is lost and what is gained by having those 2 different educational configurations? I don't know what the answer is, but every community really has to find that answer for themselves.
But that would seem to suggest that we sort of have to accept a certain price. I mean, it might get to a certain.
You do, I mean, you do, but it's just a matter of where you are. And we talked about this years ago, most towns in the northwest corner are dedicated to keeping the community looking and feeling the way it does. That's why they moved here, or that's why they stayed here. No one is gonna say we ought to build an Amazon warehouse on Litchfield Road. It'll bring in 10,000 jobs. We don't want those jobs. We don't want that kind of work here. Because we came to Norfolk because it looks like this and it feels like this. And most zoning regulations, affordable housing, be still my heart, not
We're
here.
good on affordable housing in this town.
Yeah, well, good. But what I'm saying is many of the structural things in place that will make it hard for you to attract large numbers of young families are of your own making, and for good reason. I grew up in Sharon. It's beautiful. It still looks exactly the way it did when I grew up there 50 years ago. That's the way they like it, and that's the way it'll stay, and their per pupil is 29. When I was at Sharon Center School, we had 2 grades, 2 classes of 25 kids, K through 8. And now there are 80 kids in the building.
Is there an optimal number if you're looking at like a K through 6? I mean, is psychologically, is it are more kids better?
I think if you had 10 elementary teachers, and I know we have several former 10 elementary teachers, and I think 14 and 18 is just like a dream. It's enough kids to create different groups and to create interactions. Once you get over 18, 19, 20, the teacher can still do it, but it gets more and more challenging. The more intense and personal you want the instruction to be, the bigger the number, the harder it gets. Once you start getting below 12, 14, 12, single digits, especially if you're in a K-8, those are the 8 faces you're gonna see for 9 years of your life, and it's a lottery, right? You get the right mix, it could be magic. You get the wrong mix, it could ruin a kid, absolutely. 2 bad teachers in a row,
It's true.
and one of the